Today, we are going to be making candy out of honey. Absolutely beautiful. Now, some of you may have seen one of our more recent uploads where we took honey, stuck it in our freeze dryer, and turned it into honey powder. Well, the journey to get to freeze-dried honey powder actually had us experimenting with honey quite a bit. And one of our experiments was to take honey and turn it into a candy and then freeze dry it. Interestingly enough, depending on the candy that you make with honey, whether it's a soft caramel or a brittle or whatever you end up making, and depending on the temperature that you freeze dry it, you get completely different results. I'm going to show you the different results of what it looks like when you freeze dry honey candy. It's actually pretty fascinating. And for those of you who watched the freeze-dried honey video and were curious as to the second way that we turned honey into a powder, well, you're going to get that answer today. Now, before we make candy out of honey, there's a couple things that you need to know. First and foremost, it's super easy. It only requires one ingredient, and that's really good quality honey. It happens incredibly fast, generally less than about 7 minutes. And when it comes to honey, this is super important. It really only has 3 stages. So unlike sugar that you'll have, a thread stage, a soft ball, a firm ball, a hard ball, a soft crack, a hard crack, unlike regular sugar, when it comes to honey, you kind of have soft ball, hard crack, and then burnt. And when you get to the high end of hard crack, after about 20 to 30 seconds, you've burnt it and you can immediately tell, and at that point you've ruined it. So you've got to very carefully manage your temperature. You've got to have everything ready and put in place so that by the time you are where you need to be, depending on the kind of candy you're going to be making, you are ready to move, because you're going to have to move kind of quick. All right, with that being said, let's make candy out of honey.
All right, here's what we're going to be working with. We have 2 cups of pure all-natural honey, and the amount of honey you use is irrelevant. Just make sure your pot's big enough. Let's get into the kitchen, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that honey. So I'm going to put this in a large skillet, and right here we have an instant read thermometer, but honestly, you can almost time this. This first stage, the softball stage for honey, we're going to cook for about 5 minutes. And we have the heat currently on about a medium. We're going to very gently heat this up, and if you set a timer for 5 minutes, anywhere between that 4 to 5 minute mark, this should be ready. So once it starts boiling, we want to continually stir. You don't want to just let it sit. And unlike sugar that has a softball stage between 235 and 240, you can take honey up to like 280 and it'll still be at that softball stage. We're just about there. I'm going to test it in some cold water. And when I grab a little bit of that honey, I should be able to form a soft ball. There we go. Sorry for the blurry shot. And there we go. There's our soft ball. I'm going to show you the temp of my honey so that you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. And it looks like right now we are at 270. Perfect. And like I said, you can even take this up to 280, even 290, and it'll still be at that softball stage. So let's take it off the heat and let it cool a minute. You want to be careful because the honey liquid is going to be very hot and sticky. It will burn you. All right, so we're going to spread that out onto a silicone mat. And as it cools, you'll be able to start to pull it from the sides. And that's what we're going to do here in just a second. Right now, it is way too hot to touch, but after a few minutes, and you'll see right here, it'll pull away from the sides, and then we'll be able to form it. All right, once the honey's off the silicone mat, we're going to begin the process of stretching it. So stretching honey at this stage is going to incorporate lots of little air bubbles, and that's going to do a couple things. It's going to make the final product nice and chewy, but it's also going to help change the color and give us that beautiful caramel-like color. Right here, I'm just going to fast forward the process, but all I'm doing here is just stretching the heck out of it, folding it on itself, and then re-stretching. And then I'll cut it up into pieces and stick it on a tray, which is what we have here. Beautiful caramel color, and our candy made from honey is finished. It's going to have the texture of like a very soft caramel. You could pull it from the tray right here and see that it is incredibly pliable. Absolutely perfect, and it will still retain its honey flavor. I'm going to cut this up into pieces, though, and stick it on the rest of the trays so that we can take this and stick it into our freeze dryer. This is going into our large Blue Alpine freeze dryer. I'm using the 4-tray shelf system. The one it comes with is actually 5 trays, but this gives us a little more space in between each shelf. And let's look at the programming. So the home screen, we're going to click the recipes button, and then from here, we're going to click the candy option. Our temperature here is going to be 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and after hitting continue, the process will begin, and this is what our candy candy looks like during that freeze drying cycle. Very bubbly, very active. And then, after it was all said and done, it kind of made a mess. Didn't really do what I was hoping it would do. After a couple of hours of being in the freeze dryer, we're going to open it up. And let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about this softball stage freeze-dried honey candy?
All right, so the softball stage honey candy did not perform very well in the freeze dryer. Unlike regular sugar, like if you have, a taffy or something like that, which will expand, hold its shape, and then become a very crispy, crunchy candy at that point, honey does not act like that. It tends to act like honey. It'll expand, get very airy, and then depending on how much you have, it could get overexpanded and create a huge mess. So as far as softball stage, no bueno. We're going to go ahead and cook up some more honey and bring that to a hard crack stage, which is the second stage of honey. And then at that point, we're going to toss it in the freeze dryer and see what the freeze-dried version of that candy looks like. Let's make it happen.
All right, let's add some honey to a skillet and cut the heat on medium. We're going to manage the temperature. The hard crack stage for honey is anything between 300 and 310 degrees, which will typically take around 6 to 7 minutes. Right now we're at 305. Let me put a little of that syrup inside some cold water. There we go. We're at our hard crack stage. Now we're going to pull it off the heat and get it onto a mat. So at this point, we're going to do basically the exact same thing as we did before. We're going to let it cool because it is ripping hot. And I thought that perhaps gloves might make this process easier, but they actually just got in the way. So the next time we make this, definitely no gloves. The very center is still very hot, but around the edges, it's somewhat manageable. And this actually begins to cool pretty quick, especially on that silicone mat that's on that stainless steel baking sheet. And so let's go ahead and see if we could separate it from the mat. Absolutely perfect. Now, if you wanted, you could leave it just like that until it cooled completely, at which point you'll have a hard candy, and that would be totally fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to stretch it just like we did before. Now, when you stretch candy that's been taken to a hard crack stage, especially this one, once again, you're going to be introducing air bubbles, which is going to increase the volume of your candy, but you're also going to make it slightly more brittle rather than hard. And for this candy, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So let the stretching begin. And immediately I can tell you that this version of our honey candy feels very different than the soft caramel. This version is slightly more firm, and as you can see right here, it just stretches beautifully, much better than the soft caramel. Absolutely amazing. I'm loving the color transformation. It's like golden at this point. Okay, if you work quick enough, your honey candy will still be relatively pliable at this stage. You can cut it and then roll it out. And if you let it cool, it'll firm up and turn into hard candy honey sticks. Also, if you let it cool, you can tap it with a knife and break it apart pretty easy. What we're going to do, though, because it's still relatively pliable, is use some scissors and just cut little pieces off of them. And if you let those pieces cool down, they will harden up and become honey mints. Absolutely beautiful. But what we're going to do is place these into our freeze dryer. On the Blue Alpine home screen, we're hitting the recipes option back to candy. And we're going to lower the temperature. Right now it's set to 149 degrees Fahrenheit. And there's a couple ways you could do that. Right now we're just going to do it through the program itself. So it's asking if we want to pre-warm the candy. I do not, but right here I can also lower the temperature. And we're going to bring that down to 130. In a minute, we'll do another batch, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when you freeze dry it at a higher temperature. So let's hit no. I don't want to pre-warm. And the process has now begun. Very quickly, we're going to load up our trays. And once again, I'm using the 4-tray shelf system. I'm going to be using that through this whole video. And that's only because I get a little more clearance between each shelf. This is what our freeze-dried honey puffs look like. A little bit of rice in there. Honey definitely has its own characteristics when it comes to, not only heating, but also freeze-drying. It definitely doesn't act like regular sugar. I like the way they look. No problem here. We've got 4 trays of this honey candy. And as they cool down, they will crisp up a little bit more. We're just going to remove them from the tray and take a little closer look at them. All right, very nice. Let's give it a taste.
All right, guys, here's our honey candy that's been freeze-dried. We tried to keep it at a fairly low temp. And you can see it looks like little puffy wafers. So let's just give it a taste. Love the flavor. It's got this deeper, richer, toffee-like flavor. Absolutely amazing. The thing that I don't like about this particular version is that as you chew on it, it starts to kind of harden up a little bit and come together and then gets really sticky. So it starts sticking to your teeth and all that other stuff, almost like a Jolly Rancher or something like that. And for me, I'm not a big fan of that. So let's make this one more time very quickly. And this time, we're going to freeze dry it at a slightly higher temperature so that you can see the difference. Let's do it.
All right, last time. Let's add our honey. We're going to turn it on a medium and then begin the process. Just like before, we're going to bring it up to, 305. When you start to get to that higher stage of hard crack for honey, 308, 310, you got about 10 or 15 seconds before it burns. So you got to be really careful, manage your temperatures. At this point, we are at 304. Beautiful color. I did turn the heat down just a tiny little bit. And now we're going to get this onto our tray. And as you can see, it has cooled slightly. And remember, if you just plan on making honey candy, you don't want to freeze dry it or do anything like that, you can pour this liquid into several molds and then just let it harden. It'll turn into a hard candy that has a beautiful toffee honey-like flavor. It'll be absolutely delicious. We're now back to stretching, and we're going to stretch this 50, 60 different times, basically until you just don't feel like stretching anymore. And the color will change, as you can see. A lot of air is going to be incorporated, and it's going to be amazing. So cut this up into small pieces. I thought it would be fun to just twist it a little bit, but you don't certainly have to do that. And if you left this just on your counter, it would harden, and then you would have your, honey swirls or whatever you want to call them. And although right now it's still pretty pliable, in a minute it is going to harden up, and as you can see, it's already pretty brittle. Notice I banged the tray down a little harder than I should have, and a couple of pieces cracked. Now, how you break this apart is up to you. You can take a knife and just gently tap the end of that stick, and it will break off into these beautiful little pieces, and that's what we're going to be freeze drying, but this time at a higher temperature. Into the freeze dryer they go, no problem. And let's look at the home screen once again. We're going to click Recipes, and we're going to go back to Candy. This time I want to freeze dry at 145 degrees Fahrenheit. So notice that I'm fairly close. I'm at 144. No problem there. And what we're going to do is hit continue and allow the process to begin. And just so you know, with the Blue Alpine freeze dryer, you can adjust the time and the temperature during the cycle. So let's just increase the temp if we wanted to, bring it up to 160. Let's see how high it goes. All right, 166, there we go. So that's on the high end. We're definitely not going to be freeze drying at 166. I'm going to freeze dry at 145. And we are good to go. So the shelf temperature is going to get to 145, and this process is honestly only going to take a couple of hours. Let me show you what the candy looks like as the trays begin to heat up. They've definitely puffed up nicely, but that continued hotter temperature over the course of 2 hours have actually turned them into this. And so they softened, they melted a little bit, and they became like brittle wafers, which is pretty cool. An hour and 47 minutes has passed, and they are completely finished. So this process doesn't take very long. But before we pull them out, we do want to cool them down. So I am going to lower the temperature to 70 Fahrenheit and let the machine cool down while it's under vacuum. This is going to help set the bubbles. It's going to keep everything nice and firm so that when we release the vacuum, everything stays exactly the way that it should. And that's what we're looking at right here. Let's pull out the tray. Oh, wow, that looks great. Love the way that looks. Okay, very pleased. Our hard honey candy did have a nice transformation in the freeze dryer. They kind of look like little xenomorph egg sacs or something like that. Very cool looking. Nice and thin, very airy. Let's take a closer look at this one right here. Ooh, I like that. Let me know in the comment section. What do you think? Let's give it a bite.
All right, guys, here it goes. This is our freeze-dried candy that's been freeze-dried at a slightly higher temperature. I actually like the way that this looks. It reminds me a little bit more of like a brittle. Let's just give it a bite. Oh, that's better. Flavor-wise, it's the same. Oh yeah, for me, that's perfect. I mean, this version of the candy at the higher temperature acts like a brittle. And because it's so thin, like a wafer, I mean, it just crisps up right when you eat it. You still get that deep, dark, rich, complex, toffee-like flavor, and then it's gone. One more time. Oh, that's nice. Unlike the other one that had the same flavor, but tend to linger. Too sticky, got all over your teeth, hard to chew right there towards the end, and would probably better maybe to just suck on the candy until it dissolved, like a peppermint or something like that. But when you start chewing on it, it gets a little complicated. One particular thing that I found interesting, and this applied to both versions of the freeze-dried honey candy, was that if we kept it in a Ziploc bag at room temperature, the candy would get incredibly sticky. All of the pieces would stick together and form one big candy mass. And then also, when you go to take a bite, it didn't deliver that crispy bite. But the minute you put it in the refrigerator, and this applied to both, the ball sort of loosened up a little bit, the pieces were no longer sticky, and when you would go bite it, it was ultra crunchy, just like you saw right here. And so, at least for me, if we were going to remake this candy, we would have to store the finished product in the refrigerator so that it wouldn't stick to each other and each bite would be crispy crunchy. Now, for those of you wanting to know how we made honey powder a second way that had a deeper, darker, richer flavor, I'm sure you can guess what I'm about to do right now. Let me just show you right quick. We took our honey candy. Now, you see I've got it in a Ziploc bag right now. It is ultra loose. The pieces aren't sticking together. It's been in the refrigerator, and all I did was crunch it up just like this. And now we have honey powder a different way, and you could take this and add it to your favorite desserts or recipes or whatever you want. And remember, this is going to have a slightly more complex flavor, whereas our regular honey powder, and you can see this is just regular freeze-dried honey that we turned into powder. I want to say that this may be a total of like a cup and a half of honey turned into powder, which is pretty interesting. And you can notice the huge color difference between the two. So this one's going to taste like pure honey, no change in flavor, whereas this one's going to taste more like that caramel toffee type of element. All right, folks, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And if you want more information on the freeze dryer that we used in this video, that's the Blue Alpine freeze dryer, I'll put a link to their company in the description box below. We were able to turn our honey candy into more like a honey brittle, which was amazing. And then, of course, at the end of this video, if you want to see how we turned our honey into this beautiful honey powder, I'll put a video suggestion probably right about here towards the very end of this video. If you're new here and you like this type of content, please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss a single one of our uploads. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. So good. I wish I wouldn't have crunched it all up. See you later.